Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you all for coming out. My name is Jason Unamaker. I'm the city manager for the city of FELLSMERE. We're very pleased to have y'all in attendance for this policy discussion. I want to thank all of y'all. It really is something we like to continue to host. This is a perfect forum for these type of venues. And I want to thank the Sebastian Area Chamber of Commerce for facilitating this discussion. We've been kind of surprised at the lack of discussion in the area about what's a pretty substantive issue and could have a lot of ramifications for our area. So without further ado, I don't want to chew up a lot of time. I want to introduce Beth Mitchell, Executive Director for the Sebastian Area Chamber of Commerce. Beth?
I would like to welcome everybody, and I'm really pleased that the city of FELLSMERE has provided this beautiful auditorium for us to have this discussion about Amendment 2. Both sides of this issue are represented tonight, and we will provide opportunities for each side to provide statements of their position, and we're going to pose 15 questions to them that have been drafted with the intention of fleshing out the issues of the amendment. The questions have been provided to both parties prior to this evening, and because we want the two sides to be able to answer our questions thoughtfully, we will not be allowing questions from the audience. The audience, I would ask for civility and great listening skills. This forum is for your benefit, and hopefully you'll gain information to help you decide where you stand on this issue. I would also ask that everybody turn their cell phones off and that there be no clapping or commenting while the speakers are engaged, and we would appreciate your cooperation. Our discussion tonight is about Amendment 2, and here's the ballot summary of the amendment. Allows for medical use of marijuana for individuals with debilitating medical conditions as determined by a licensed Florida physician. Allows for caregivers to assist patients medical use of marijuana. The Department of Health shall register and regulate centers that produce and distribute marijuana for medical purposes and shall issue identification cards to patients and caregivers. Applies only to Florida law. Does not immunize violations of federal law or any non-medical use, possession, or production of marijuana. Okay, here's how we're going to proceed. Each side will have 3 minutes. Oh, you know what? I made a mistake. No, I'm right. Okay, each side will have 3 minutes to do opening statements. And we'll flip a coin to decide who goes first. After that, we're going to pose 15 questions to the parties, and each side will have 2 minutes to respond or rebut. At the close, we'll have final comments from each side, and they will each have 3 minutes. Our timekeeper for the evening is my fellow chamber person, Brittany Melchiori, Marketing and Communications Director of the Sebastian River Area Chamber of Commerce. Brittany, could you stand for a minute and hold up your paddles? She will be providing a 30-second warning and then say time when it has expired. And I've coached her to try and make some eye contact with you guys, because I know you'll be making your comments, and we don't want to cut you off, but we do have the 15 questions, and I know we want to get some people out the door, and we want to cover as much as we can.
Maybe she can dance across.
Now I'd like to introduce our participants for the evening's discussion. Representing the vote yes on 2 organization is Ben Polera, Campaign Manager. Ben. And representing the vote no on 2 is Dr. Jessica Spencer, Policy Director. So let's flip a coin. I'll flip the coin. Who wants to call? You want to call?
Heads.
Heads. And heads it is. Okay. That means you get to go first. Before we get started, guys, to turn your mics on so everybody can hear that there is somewhat of an acoustic problem. We have an awesome speaker system, but we really do need to use the mics. Got it? right, you ready with timing? Okay, opening statement on the vote, no on 2.
Okay, great, thank you. I actually don't have a statement, so who knows if I'm gonna make my 3 minutes or not, I'm not sure. I'm just excited to get to the questions. So thank you for coming out tonight for this issue. It's very, very important for us to understand when we are going into the ballot box what we're actually voting on. And especially with a constitutional amendment, which will forever alter, our state constitution, it's really important. So thank you for being here and taking the time out of your evening to come. I was against this amendment in 2014 because I have 18 years in the field of addiction and prevention. And I know what marijuana is of yesterday. I know what marijuana is of today. And I am concerned about the marijuana of the future. The issue with this constitutional amendment here in 2016 is not much has changed. So I left my job again at this time to work on the campaign to make sure that we can spread awareness about the issues surrounding marijuana and that this is not just this benign plant that is no big deal, and making sure that we can educate individuals on what we're looking at and the pitfalls and loopholes that we're dealing with here. The other side came out almost immediately after, in 2014, and started collecting signatures for this amendment. Not much has changed. I'm hoping that tonight we'll be able to actually point out the changes that they did make and where there are still issues and loopholes here. We need to be concerned with those because, again, this is your constitution. This is not a bill that we can work with through our legislature. This is permanent the way it is written as it stands today. We are not dealing with the pot of the 60s and 70s that was very low in THC content. We're dealing with very high potency marijuana products and marijuana herbal material itself. So again, we're very concerned because this is not something that is in a pharmacy. This is something that is under the language of medical marijuana treatment center. Please look those up. They are pot dispensaries. These are head shops. These are not where you go in and speak to a pharmacist. You actually have to speak to a bud tender, and that's about all the training that they have is marijuana. And bud tender, of course, is not our term. That is the industry term for these individuals that work in these pot dispensaries. We are also very concerned because there are no safeguards currently in place in that language, and there won't be, because once you start altering and changing this and putting in zoning restrictions and putting in THC content and caps, what's going to happen is you are now violating their constitutional right to either own that business and run it the way they choose, or to access, quote, their medicine in a local, quick, easy way. And I think I'm still under.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And now Ben Pallero.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for having us here tonight and hosting this discussion. I'm going to tell you, hopefully in less than 3 minutes, why I think it's a pretty simple choice to vote yes on this constitutional amendment before you, which is called Use of Marijuana for Debilitating Medical Conditions. First of all, and this is the most basic purpose of the amendment's about 2 pages long, but really the core of this constitutional amendment is legalizing the medical use of marijuana for qualifying patients in the state of Florida. And what that means under the amendment is that a licensed Florida physician has diagnosed an individual with a debilitating medical condition. It's not anything, it's a debilitating medical condition, and the doctor's decision as to what is or is not debilitating is informed by a list of conditions within the amendment, including HIV, AIDS, cancer, epilepsy, PTSD, Crohn's disease, Parkinson's. So they're given notice as to what is or is not debilitating. And so that's the core of what this constitutional amendment does. It legalizes that patient's use of medical marijuana, and it legalizes the ability of the doctor to make that recommendation. And the reasons for that is marijuana helps people. It really does. There are now 25 states, plus the District of Columbia, that have legalized medical marijuana. In those states, what has happened is the sky has not fallen, crime has not skyrocketed, use of marijuana by either adults or teenagers has not risen in any significant way. Some tax revenue has come in, but mostly what has happened is people who are sick and suffering, who marijuana can help, is helping. And that's the bottom line of it. I mean, the last state, and this is not, these are states all over the country. I mean, 25 states is half the states, but it represents well over half the country. New York, Illinois, Ohio just passed legislatively a medical marijuana law that John Kasich signed. Pennsylvania was the one prior to pass one. So this is not a novel concept. We're not going on an experiment here. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're doing something that over half the rest of the country has access to, and that has had the simple effect of helping people. My reasons for being involved in this campaign are personal, but they're not personal like a lot of other people who've had cancer in their family, that have a loved one die, who've used marijuana. What I've had is a lot of loved ones in my life who have been addicted, and I believe we take too many pills, and that to the extent that marijuana can replace or supplement those pills, that's a good thing for all of us. And in fact, in a study released in the last couple of years, opiate overdose deaths decreased by 25% in states with medical marijuana laws on the books versus those without. So I think there's a lot of good reasons to support this, and it's compassion, it's less pills, and it's vote yes on Amendment 2 this November.
Thank you both. Before we get started with the questions, I was remiss in not introducing our cameraman, Keith Carson with VeroNews.com. And for everybody's information, this is being taped and it will be on VeroNews.com website, and then the City of FELLSMERE YouTube channel, and probably the Chamber YouTube channel, so other people will also be able to see it. Okay, with the questions, you each will have 2 minutes. You don't have to take all that time if you don't want. So we'll just go ahead and get started. And Dr. Spencer, we started with you, so we'll start with you again. Here it is. What safeguards are provided by the language of the proposed amendment that medical marijuana will not simply become the new pill mill problem, where practically any person can get legally high on marijuana based on an easy-to-fabricate excuse?
That's a really good question, and that's actually part of the problem with the language. And again, understanding that this is a constitutional amendment and not a bill that we can work within later. There actually are no safeguards in place. What it says, simply is that it would be regulated by the DOH and the legislature, but without actually outlining what those safeguards are, that really ties their hands into what they can and can't do, because if they do regulate and restrict, too much in someone's opinion, they can actually be litigated against because you're now violating the constitutional right. The other issue when we're looking at the pill mills is we were able to kind of get rid of those bad seedy docs. And with the language being so loose, we are concerned that we will see those same doctors come back with now a pot shop and a license to now go out and addict people to this substance, which is not this benign, safe, plant that most people actually think of, unfortunately. So, and the fabricating any excuse, when we look at the states that have, medical marijuana laws where we say, oh, well, the sky hasn't fallen. Well, what's interesting is 95 to 97% of the individuals that have these medical marijuana cards have them for conditions other than these debilitating diseases and conditions that are listed here. And the average age is a 32-year-old, and it's a white male. And we see that in every single state that has these laws.
Okay.
Okey-doke. So unfortunately, Jessica both ignored what was in the language of the constitutional amendment and also the process of implementing a constitutional amendment. Let me first clarify that. So this is, yes, it's a constitutional amendment. It amends our state's constitution, but that does not mean that the state has no say in how it gets put into place. There's an implementation process. Constitutional amendments are broad statements of philosophy of a law, and they require the implementation by the legislature. And in fact, this constitutional amendment gives an enormous breadth of power to regulate this industry to both the legislature and the Department of Health. However, let's accept the premise that this is an immutable constitutional amendment that nobody can do anything about. The safeguards are already in the relatively brief text of the amendment to prevent a pill mill scenario. And the Department of Health of the state of Florida, in analyzing the amendment, has said as much. Pill mills became a problem because you walk into a doctor's office, you said, "Doc, I have back pain." The doctor gives you a prescription for opiates, you walk out the door into a pharmacy owned by the doctor. That simply cannot happen under this constitutional amendment. The doctor has to issue a physician certification, which a patient has to send to the State Department of Health. The State Department of Health then has to issue an identification card to that patient, and not until they have a state-issued identification card are they a legal user, purchaser, consumer of medical marijuana. So those steps are all outlined in the constitutional amendment. They cannot be changed. That is accurate, and those steps alone will obviate any possibility of a potential pill mill scenario. And don't just take my word for it, take the word of the Department of Health that had to analyze this now twice before it went on the ballot.
Okay, thank you, and I want to compliment you both for actually answering our questions. Sometimes that doesn't happen. All right, the next question, Dr. Spencer. That's true. Here we go. What legitimate purpose can the state of Florida have in prohibiting the medical use of cannabis oil?
If I'm understanding the question properly, the state of Florida actually hasn't prohibited it. There are 3 laws that we have on the books that already allow the use of either cannabis in itself in raw herbal crude form or in oils. And also at end of life, which could be the raw herbal crude, if I remember correctly. So we haven't prohibited that. We have already allowed it here under 3 laws that we have, which is also part of our reasoning and concern of having a constitutional amendment that we can't work within and change versus statute that we have been able to work with and can continue to work with and change and amend as needed or get rid of as needed.
Okay, thank you.
Well, to the question, what legitimate purpose can the state of Florida have in prohibiting medical use of cannabis oil? I don't know. But I would disagree with Jessica's premise that it is currently allowed in the state of Florida, because to the extent that it is, the use is very, very narrow. It is very, very difficult for anybody under the current law to become a medical marijuana patient. It is very difficult for a doctor to recommend medical marijuana to their patients. There are very few doctors who are able to do so. There are very few people who are going to benefit under this law, who are going to be able to be legal users under this law. And because of the type of medical marijuana allowed under the law, there's the great potential that the people who actually do jump through all these hoops, who find the right doctor, who do this, who do that, who pay the fees, are still not going to benefit because the medical marijuana supplied under the current law has almost no THC in it, which is the chemical in marijuana that gets people high, but it's also the chemical in marijuana that has a lot of the medicinal properties that a lot of people need to see actually relief from the use of medical marijuana.
Okay, thank you. The next question, Dr. Spencer, is if low TCH cannabis oil is already legal in the state of Florida for medical use, is Amendment 2 really necessary?
No.
I would refer back to my answer to the previous question, but also say this low THC cannabis oil that is available, it's available at Whole Foods. This is essentially the hemp oil that you can buy at GNC or Whole Foods. It's not getting you high, it's not going to make you feel a whole hell of a lot better. And so it's really, as I talk about, there's 25 states plus DC that have medical marijuana laws. You'll notice I don't include Florida in that because Florida is not a medical marijuana state. People are not seeing the benefit of it. The type of marijuana allowed under this law just simply does not help people. And so myself, the news media, when they report on this, most other marijuana reform advocates, I think even most of the opposition uses those same 25 states plus DC numbers that I do. Florida is not a medical marijuana state.
Okay. Next question. Will non-Florida residents be able to obtain medical marijuana in Florida?
The answer to that is no, which is good. And I'll also say that we are a medical marijuana state. In fact, Rohrabacher Farr, on the federal level, when they went in 2 years ago to say that funds could not be used to regulate in medical marijuana states, Florida was identified by them then, and that was prior to Charlotte's Web being signed into the legislature. So we are identified even on a national level as being a medical marijuana state.
So this is another question which Jessica did not answer correctly because she hasn't read the amendment in question. Non-Florida residents will be able to obtain medical marijuana. There's no residency requirement in the constitutional amendment. To the extent there's a residency requirement, it's that the recommendation of medical marijuana come from a licensed Florida physician. However, because of the multi-step process to become a legal user of marijuana, medical marijuana under this law that I described in talking about the potential pill mill scenario, it is unlikely that unless you're a seasonal resident, unless you're here for a few months, that a non-resident could become a legal medical marijuana user. It's not something you could do on a week-long vacation to Disney because you have to go to the doctor, send the document in the Department of Health, get an ID card. But yes, technically there will be, I'm sure, snowbirds who are medical marijuana users in the state. Maybe even Canadians.
Okay, thank you. Given that there are no known cases of death from overdose from smoking marijuana, you guys want me to start
I'm
again?
sorry, sidebar. What was the question?
Given, I can finish it. Given that there are no known cases of death from overdose from smoking marijuana, wouldn't it be better to simply legalize recreational marijuana in Florida and collect sales tax?
The first part of this question, there are actually known cases. Simply look at PubMed, and there are actually cardiac arrhythmias that were cannabis-induced that did result in death. And then there are the secondary deaths that we've seen with individuals over-ingesting edibles. The other half of this question actually has absolutely nothing to do with Amendment 2, unless you're looking at Amendment 2 as de facto legalization. But the discussion of legalizing recreational marijuana is a different discussion. That is not what this amendment supposedly is about, and that's not what the focus of discussing Amendment 2 is actually about. But that is an interesting discussion, and I'd love to come back, and I'm sure Ben would too, for that discussion.
You got that on camera where she said this is not about legalizing marijuana, right?
And what did I say after that?
That I would love to do it.
Pay attention.
Okay, guys, let's stay on focus here.
Well, first of all, there are no known cases of death from overdose from smoking marijuana. That's true. And we're not talking about, the question was not about secondary deaths, it was about overdose deaths from smoking marijuana. That has not happened in the history of human civilization, but then I would agree with the rest of what Jessica said. We're talking now about there's legalizing marijuana for adult use and legalizing medical marijuana to discrete subjects.
Okay, thank you. If this amendment passes, what limitations should be placed on the forms of marijuana that may be used?
This question is irrelevant because it says in the amendment what's allowed: food, tinctures, aerosols, oils, and ointments. We can't do anything about that. So the question of what forms of marijuana may be used is already listed in the amendment, and therein lies another huge problem, because what isn't listed in the amendment is the THC cap. We're not going to be able to cap the amount of THC that's in these products, and unfortunately, again, the raw herbal material that we're seeing is very high in THC, and then now let's move into our edibles and our oils and our butter and our dabs and those sorts of things. This amendment allows for all of those products to be available, so limitations, we can't place them because it specifically says in the amendment that all forms are allowed.
I agree. All forms of marijuana are allowed under the constitutional amendment. That doesn't mean that the state can't place limitations on how it is packaged and marketed. And it also explicitly states in the amendment that the Department of Health is to place limits on how much marijuana a qualified patient can or should be able to buy. A limit that can only be overcome by that patient demonstrating a particular need to have more than that amount of marijuana. So while the forms of marijuana are going to be limited basically by the market for them, how they are presented to consumers, to patients for purchase and use can certainly and will be limited.
Okay, thank you. Because this amendment makes the use of so-called medical marijuana a constitutional right, won't most regulations imposed by the legislature simply provoke litigation?
Yes, and that therein lies the problem, and Ben says, well, they can and should be regulated. Well, if they can and should be regulated, why is that language not in there? It would have taken 2 spaces to put a cap or a limit on how much THC can actually be in these products. And this whole idea of, oh, well, you know, our legislature can handle it, and oh, the DOH is going to be able to regulate this. They can certainly try, but look at fair districts. We just went through this issue. You cannot argue or add or regulate plain language. And that's the misnomer that is out there, that, oh, we'll be able to go ahead and regulate and do whatever we need to do. But what's also interesting is the other side has bemoaned the legislature and the Department of Health since day one. So now all of a sudden you trust them to regulate? It's infallible. It's fallible to think that that's actually what's going to happen. And litigation is written in between all of these lines in here. So absolutely, we will see litigation. And we've already had Mr. Morgan come out and say a couple of weeks ago, you know, Billy Sue or whoever it was shouldn't have to drive 20 miles to get their medication. Therein, if you prohibit where we put these, we will be able to come after and sue you for it.
Well, the question is, won't most regulations imposed by the legislature provoke litigation? And the answer is not, as long as they're in keeping with the spirit and the letter of the constitutional amendment. Jessica referenced fair districts. Well, the president of the Florida Senate admitted to violating the Florida Constitution. He broke the law. So I hope there's no litigation, and so long as our legislature, these people that ostensibly represent us in Tallahassee, don't break the law, there will be no litigation.
Okay. Because of some comments you made earlier, Ben, I'm going to give this next question to you first. And it's a long one, so bear with me. Given the known side effects, severe side effects of many conventional mental health drugs, and the relatively tolerable negative side effects of smoking marijuana, why shouldn't Floridians suffering from mental illness, such as severe depression, be permitted to smoke marijuana in moderation and under the guidance of a treating physician, instead of taking legal but addictive, potentially harmful drugs?
They should. I mean, they should, and in the new version of this constitutional amendment, one of the changes we made from the 2014 iteration was we added a couple of conditions to the list of debilitating medical conditions in the definition of debilitating medical condition. One of those was PTSD. It's the only psychiatric disorder in the list that we provide in the amendment. Previously, there was none, and I've been through this dance with Jessica a few times. She's going to give you all sorts of statistics on how marijuana doesn't help PTSD, and in fact it hurts. That is not accurate for everyone. And just like Xanax doesn't work for everyone, just like Prozac doesn't work for everyone, marijuana doesn't work for everyone. But if the Xanax is not working, if the Prozac is not working, marijuana certainly should be another treatment option available to people with severe mental illnesses and anxiety disorders.
The difference between prescription drugs and a whole plant that has over 500 chemicals is pretty complex, but also pretty simple. When we're looking at these drugs and the pharmaceuticals that we have known predictable side effects. We know what they're going to be, and we also know what chemical in that particular drug targets what particular illness or condition that we have. What's also interesting to know when we look at PTSD and how that's in here is when you go and read further of the same kind or class as or comparable to those enumerated. That then means that the symptomology that comes along with PTSD, your anxiety, your depression, etc., are going to be able to be your other conditions as to why people will be able to get a recommendation for marijuana. I'm not going to quote any statistics, but we like to talk about all these anecdotal stories about how it helps people. I take great offense to the PTSD piece, only because I am the daughter of a Vietnam veteran that had significant PTSD, that smoked pot every single day of his life. And in the 90s, when it was very much lower THC content, his use of this drug to combat his issues did not stop him from putting a gun in his mouth in my backyard. I'm very concerned about the use of the substance for that way. I'm also concerned because the National Organization of Reform of Marijuana Laws has long since said that they know that marijuana leads to mental health issues. So why on earth would you provide someone that already has a struggle to deal with something that causes mental health conditions and may exacerbate their problem? Now, Ben is right, not everyone reacts the same to medications, but for something that has 500 chemicals in it that we don't know what it targets specifically, but we do know that it's detrimental, it's a disservice and a disjustice to those people that are suffering.